come in, people who've been waiting patiently while we were on break. One in particular, we have two young men who watch the show almost religiously that are so inspirational to me, both young men who have cerebral palsy and who are so interested in the field of autism. One of them is planning to be a therapist, and the other is interested, I think, more in research. And his question for us today is that even though Rhett syndrome was discovered to be its own genetic disorder, does it have comorbidity with autism?
Well, I don't know that you could say it has comorbidity because it takes over. If you have a diagnosis of Rhett's, then you're treating Rhett's, which is much more important to treat. When you have a disorder that you can diagnose based on genetic components, then you go with that rather than something that you're diagnosing based on behavioral, because when you based on behavioral symptoms, you don't really know the cause. So Rhett's being a much more severe disorder would take precedence. But it used to be part of the Autism Spectrum Disorder 5 diagnoses. It was autistic disorder, Asperger's, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, disintegrative disorder, which none of us ever really used because it was basically autism, regressive autism, and then Rhett's. And so it was definitely part of the syndrome because the behavioral characteristics were very similar.
Okay. And then as another question that he wanted to know, at this point with the DSM-5, is autism, wondering about autism, is it considered to be a pervasive developmental disorder, a neurological disorder, or if it's listed now as a neurological pervasive developmental disorder?
Right. Your questions are really good. They're great questions. Yeah. People don't really go into the definition of these things too much, and you were doing that, and that's great. It's pervasive in that it affects more than one system, so it affects your language development and your social development, and of course it also correlates with the presence of those stereotypical repetitive behaviors. If it was affecting just one system, like language, for instance, then it would be some form of language disorder. But it's pervasive in that it goes beyond just one area. It is neurological in the sense that it is affecting brain functioning, and you could also say that it is genetic because there is a genetic component to it. But as I've said before, the general understanding or belief is that the genetic aspects will influence immune functioning and will, more and more now science is leading towards the belief that this has something to do with high oxidative stress, low methylation. It has to do with how we metabolize and how we our entire biochemical system. And if those factors, for instance, methylation, are not functioning correctly, then we are less likely to be able to receive nutrients from our foods and less likely to be able to detoxify fast enough from things that are toxic in the environment. So when our biochemistry, when our let's say skewed biochemistry or biochemistry of our kids, where it's not really functioning the way that it should, interacts with environmental toxins, then that will possibly result in these symptoms that we call autism.
Okay. A lengthy explanation, but I hopefully that works for you, and I know that you'll give me follow-up if you want more information about that. And then we had a really long question from a young man who previously was diagnosed with PDD-nos. And he has some concerns now that the DSM-5 changes have happened about where, his feeling is that it's only been a question of insurance up to this point. And he lists what his insurance would have been. He has a feeling that now, if he were to be diagnosed, it would be autism spectrum disorder, but perhaps at level 1, the least severe level. He says, but I'm not sure. To have a social communication disorder, according to the DSM-5, my understanding is that autism spectrum disorder would have to be ruled out, and I don't see how that would happen easily. Based on what I've read, when the organization started using DSM-5 and DSM-4TR becomes obsolete, and PDD-NOS and Asperger syndrome become an obsolete diagnosis, I will probably be considered as having an autism spectrum disorder. but I don't let that bother me, and I'm sure that I will get used to it. Is that, in fact, what will happen to most of the PDD-NOS and Asperger disorder adults?
Yeah. What will happen, or what is, I suppose in some ways you're grandfathered in. So if you already have a diagnosis of Asperger's or PDD-NOS, then yes, you will fall now under the ASD diagnosis. However, sometime in the future, perhaps if you are seeking help, or let's say a year from now, anytime after the first year, and you see a professional, they of course could then go back and say, oh no, you really don't have PDD-NOS anymore, but now you have social communication disorder or some other thing. And you are correct in that if you are not under the ASD umbrella, your insurance will cut off.
Okay.
And that's why when I did the initial diagnostic presentation, I did mention the social communication disorder because it's a new diagnosis. And I do believe this young gentleman is very astute in figuring this out, and that I do believe that over time the concept here is that if you are too mild, or if you're if you have very mild symptoms of ASD, then you might be reclassified, and once your symptoms might be reclassified, and if they are, that would be one way that insurance can cut off.
Because there is no mandate at this point to get services for social communication disorder.
Correct.
Okay.
It's like saying, well, I mean, it's not that it would cut off, it will just go under mental health, right? And mental health is like anxiety or like any other thing, and with mental health, your coverage changes completely, and you'll drop down to like maybe 50% of $1,000 in a year or something like that.
Okay, so your answer brought up a question for me. Let's say that you have a child who was diagnosed with PDD-NOS, and you were fighting for your insurance before, and now you've been grandfathered in, and so they're considered ASD for this period of time. So you can be getting, in most states, you can be getting autism services, getting ABA, and we want to encourage everybody to get quality ABA. That's my watchword for this entire year.
Great.
But let's say that the next time that you have your triannual IEP, the school is going to request that you get your child re-evaluated. And at that point...
So, okay, and that's a really good point what you're bringing up. So what happened, do you remember, I don't know if you, well, this was our experience in California, let's put it that way. Because California had a system up till, or still has a system where, actually it's slightly changing, but where the regional center system, Department of Developmental Disabilities, would fund autism, but not PDD or Asperger's, if you recall. So, you know, a lot of times our kids would come in, and to be ethical, I had to either diagnose them with autism or autistic disorder or Asperger's or PDD. And the truth is, you know, it is what it is. As a professional, you have to be very ethical and honest about these things, but it was a very small difference, and it was quite a different, ridiculous situation, because, you know, with PDD and with autism, you have 6 symptoms. With PDD-NOS, you have 5. It's complete ridiculousness.
The kid still needs support and still needs the services, but that one thing meant the difference of whether they got the funding or not.
Exactly.
Tragic.
Exactly. Now, on the one hand, every parent wants to hear that my child doesn't fit, doesn't have enough symptoms to have a diagnosis of autism or autistic disorder. But on the other hand, it really will determine your future in some ways, because if you don't get that funding, you're going to stay right where you are. And the other side of it, of course, was that a child who came in with autistic disorder would, over the course of a year or 2 years, their diagnosis would change, right? Because their symptoms would be reducing anyway. And so they would gradually become either PDD-NOS or Asperger's or ADHD even, and then nothing. Or other things. I mean, you could also go into, like, let's say, mixed receptive expressive language disorder and so on. And so your diagnosis changes as your symptomology changes, because you realize all of these diagnoses have to do with behavioral symptoms. So but the point was, for us it wasn't necessary, because it's not like our ABA or our therapy only affects a child with 6 symptoms and doesn't really affect a child with 5 symptoms. We're changing behavior. We're bringing kids onto the normal curve of development. So for us, we would continue to fund, and in some cases, as you said, Shannon, the regional center would go back and require that the family get a diagnosis, and that, yes, before they were finished, their funding would cut off.
Yeah.
And I think with insurance, this is one way that as our children progress and come out of the ASD spectrum, and start going into other slightly less delays that could be potentially diagnosed as other things, this is one way that their funding will unfortunately end.
So I'm as a parent, I'm wondering for parents if they should be, if you're grandfathered in, you should be very careful about getting your child evaluated.
Absolutely. I mean, with my kid, you have to realize any child, right, who has autism and then receives therapy and comes out of the autism, recovers from the autism. It's not like you recover from one day to the next.
Right.
You recover by gradually losing symptoms and gaining skills. And as you gradually lose symptoms and gain skills, your diagnostic criteria change, right? The minute that your communication or language hits normal, you might still have stereotypical behaviors, you might still have social delays, but you can't hit diagnosis of autism anymore. You know what I'm saying? So,
I do, and the fear
you have to
is
be very cautious with that. I've always been very cautious with that. I've never touched diagnosis unless I needed to.
Okay.
And I don't think school districts, once they have an initial diagnosis, I'm not sure if they will require additional diagnostic validation every triennial. I don't think they do. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. Just off the top of my head, I don't remember that.
But I think, the thing that the walk away for parents is, if you are grandfathered in, be cautious about getting another diagnosis before you're done.
That's
we don't want
correct.
to leave job unfinished.
Well, that's one thing, and the other thing is, of course, you as a parent, if you want to know what's going on for your own sake, remember that when you get a diagnosis from a psychologist, it is entirely confidential. Or from a pediatrician or a psychiatrist or whatever. And so unless you release that diagnosis to anyone else, it's only yours.
Good point.
Yeah.
A really good point. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she is answering your questions live. If you have a question for her, we still have a little bit of time, and I've got a lot of questions in the queue, but you can write in your question on the live feature at www.autism-live. The questions we don't get to, we recycle for the following week, so we do get to them eventually. But let's start out with talking about schools, because this is a subject very near and dear to my heart right now. We're looking at schools for my son, and I have noticed that it's really hard to get information about whether a school will be autism friendly. And so I want to know this too. Somebody wants to know, if you're moving to another state, how can you find out about autism schools? How are they rated? Is there a rating? I think we could all use that information.
That's actually so cool that somebody asked that, and I hadn't thought about this answer, but now I can give this answer.
Okay.
So first of all, no, there isn't a rating. I'm not sure what you're looking for when you say autism school, because of course there are schools that I actually don't know that there are too many left. There are a couple that are just pure special ed schools, and then there are, of course, classrooms that are for autism. There are, the most prevalent, I would say right now, is regular schools that have autism classrooms within them, or non-categorical classrooms, so mixed special educational disabilities. Or, of course, then there are other levels like regular education with, let's say, assistance for a child, or the child might be in a regular education class and then reverse mainstream or mainstream. And there's like all sorts of educational differences. Obviously for you, when you're looking at a school, let's say for GEM, you'd be looking for a regular school that is friendly towards kids that might have slight differences and need a little bit more assistance. You're looking at more regular ed school that will give you accommodation, that type of thing. Now, no, there is no rating system, and it's very, very hard, I think, for parents, especially when they're moving. So this is one of the things that I had thought about, and I've mentioned this to you before, is that, you know, we're very lucky at CARD because we're in so many different states and we have a lot of local information. And so if we are at it, like, and Evelyn Kong, our clinical director, always retains this stuff in her head. I don't know how she does that, but like someone will call us, one of the parents, and we'll have an experience with a school and we'll start going into their program and learning about them and training teachers and assisting and stuff and learning, oh, this is great, this is a great school. And we keep that, and then other parents who are in the area in the future, when they start asking us, we know, oh yes, in the Irvine area we know this and the whatever, you know?
Right.
But we've never really been able to like put it down and rate them and be able to classify them until now. And so I don't know if you know, if you remember all of last year, I kept telling you that I really want to do this sort of DG's list, which will be an Angie's List version of autism. So a young lady that we brought on at CARD has started to develop this for us, and it will be coming out very soon. I'm not really supposed to talk all about it in detail.
So something for later on.
Yeah, but one of the things that it will do is rate schools, rate providers, rate everything.
Which we'll look forward to, because that's an area where we could use some support. We want that insider information about how does this work, how would I, you know, what questions would I ask, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. And but for now, I would suggest that the best resource is local parent groups.
Okay.
And getting in touch with other families, because that's where we get a lot of our information on these things as well.
And I always advocate for all parents, have a local support group and a global support group that you feel really comfortable in. There's so many of them now, whether it's a Taka group,
so true,
or you can go on Cafe Mom, or there are Yahoo groups, there are Facebook groups, and it really is a lifesaver to be able to go to those groups and ask questions of, you know, who's the pediatrician to go to, or who's the person who cuts hair, who's going to understand that my child doesn't like the snip snip sound, or doesn't like the buzz buzz sound, you know, because different kids. So, you know, knowing those kinds of things, and it's, you know, really, really helpful to know those things. Okay, somebody says, just got out of a meeting and just wanted to say welcome back. We missed you. We missed you too. Thrilled that you're back with us. Okay, another person who says, our autistic son wakes up every night between 3 and 4 a.m. Oh, joy, right? Yeah. We've tried melatonin and Benadryl with poor results. What can we do to resolve this problem?
Right. So you know that I'm a big fan of a particular company. Their product is called Tranquil Sleep, and it is melatonin. It's a combination of melatonin and 5-HTP tryptophan. And melatonin doesn't work for me or my kids. This product works. It works for pretty much anyone I've ever told. So I really recommend it. It's a chewable product. It's one tablet is 3 milligrams of melatonin. I'm not sure how much tryptophan, but it works really, really well. Yeah. So I would move to that. If that doesn't work, then I would really go see your pediatrician and get something that's a little bit stronger. Okay, great.
Another person who wants to know, hi Shannon and Dr. Doreen, my son started with CARD in October. He's 3 years and 2 months.
Shannon, yes. I'm just like stuck on the previous answer.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about it a little bit more. But I mean, that's one quick solution. But, you know, from a behaviorist perspective, you really should also be looking at what's going on around. So make sure there's no noise that suddenly wakes him up. Like sometimes we're not aware of this, but like, hey, 2 or 3 is when the sprinklers go on. I don't know.
Or the next door neighbor who works the night shift comes home then, and that's when their car alarm chirps.
Exactly. Like our kids have such sensitive hearing that we don't really realize these things. And also, even if there isn't an identifiable antecedent, sometimes it just becomes a pattern of behavior, a habit. Especially if you wake up, and when you wake up, you go out and eat, it'll just become an automatic behavior that you're going to wake up every night.
Yeah,
at that
your
time.
Body will wake you up.
It's just
this
is
when
simple.
We eat.
That's right. So you make sure that you want to make sure that the room is very dark. That your child is, you know, going to bed approximately the same time, has the same type of routine. Make sure that it's quiet. and then, perhaps spend the night in the room without the child knowing, and see if there's anything else, or record.
Yeah, I was going to say, how about a video camera? Set up the video camera just so that you can rewind and see what happened.
Right.
I know obviously you'd want to do it more than once so that you could see if there's a pattern of something going on.
That's exactly right. And that would be the best way to figure out what's actually going on and modify what's actually going on. If you've done all of that, or if you do all of that, and you also want to make sure, like, diet will often affect our kids, those types of things. So just take a look and see, or perhaps your child's going to bed too early. I don't know. There's so many different things you have to look at, but you're turning to a different type of melatonin is probably your last option.
And the one thing that I would say as a parent, because once my son would go to sleep, we never had a problem, but getting him to go to sleep was our biggest first problem to overcome. And I talk about it now and say, here's the problem, was that I was so tired that my IQ was low.
Oh gosh, I
was so tired. And so I couldn't like, if you had said to me, set up a video camera and tape it, I wouldn't have been able to get it on the tripod.
I totally get it.
So, and we got some help. And I would encourage you, if you have a best girlfriend or a family member who can come and stay with you a couple of nights so that you can get a couple of hours of sleep so that you'll be able to attack the problem with you having gotten a little sleep, it will be much easier.
That's right. It's so difficult. I mean, gosh, I remember when my kids were little, and I wouldn't sleep, and if it was like weeks and weeks of not sleeping, at the end of 2 weeks, you're not doing anything functional. You're pleading with your baby. Please sleep.
Well, you cease being rational is the problem. And so when something that would make perfect sense to you when you were slept is completely not in your head.
Totally.
Which makes it that much harder. The fact that you could write the sentence into us, I applaud you. You're doing much better than I would have been. But anyway, okay, so on to the next one. My son started with CARD in October. He's 3 years and 2 months. We started potty training him, and it's over a month and a half and still not potty trained. Is that normal?
Yeah, it's normal. I wouldn't worry about it, but you'd want to make sure that you're putting enough energy into it, I guess. I mean, 3 is good age, great age. I don't know enough about your case. I don't know how many hours are you getting with CARD? What other things are going on? Are you doing an intensive program? Is the child, do we have access to the child pretty intensively? If we do, then this should be going pretty fast. Okay. If we don't, and there's like school in the picture or other activities or whatever, and we're only doing like 10 or 15 hours, then things are going to slow down. So I don't know at this point how to answer you correctly, other than saying don't worry. I mean, 1.5 months, 2 months is not a really big deal. Plus, you went through the holidays right now. So what I would suggest, though, in order to give you some reassurance, is to ask your supervisor to schedule a review. See, we have this system at CARD, and a lot of parents don't take advantage of this, whereas I wish they would. Normally, we have case reviews going on. We have senior staff who review cases all the time. So it's not just Evelyn Kung, who is the clinical director, but she now, we have many senior supervisors. Sienna Greener-Wooten does this. All of our, Kat Minch, as you know, Dr. Kat Minch on the East Coast does this. Vince Redmond, who's been with CARD for ages, will connect with the families and just review things and answer their questions. The entire IBT team, so Cecilia Knight and Monique Valario or Erickson now, and Jen Close, and all of our senior people who've been around for a long time, that's what they do. They will review problem situations or things where the parents just wants reassurance from someone who's been around a little bit longer.
Fresh eyes.
Fresh eyes and, kind of senior eyes.
Yes.
And they will take a look at the case and they will discuss it with you. They'll get on the phone, they'll get on Skype, and they'll look at a clinic for you. They'll talk to your supervisor. They'll review the skills account with you and tell you what's going on or what should be done slightly different or whatever it is. And you can access that anytime.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I'm hoping to do in 2014, good God, I was about to say 2004. I suddenly realized, no, wait a minute, it's 2014.
Out of 10.
Is that I am trying to actually make this a more kind of structured thing, because I realize that some families use this a lot and other families really don't, and they may not even be aware of it, even though it's in the parent handbook and all that. So what I really am trying to do now is I'm trying to just produce some sort of algorithm that says, you know what, just like we do assessments annually, like we will test our kids annually, I'm just going to make it so that every family has access to senior staff on a regular basis, and that these reviews occur just, routinely.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm always struck by people at Center for Autism and Related Disorders is that it's never, when something isn't progressing as fast as we had thought or as fast as we had hoped, that it is never the child's fault.
Never.
It is never ever, and that never even occurs to anybody. As a parent, we're like, why isn't my child learning? And what I always hear from staff here is that it's not the child's fault. We're just going to figure out how we need to reconfigure what we're doing so that it does work. And we know that it will.
Right.
It's just a matter of each child as an individual, and we might need to go at it this way with this child for this many weeks and this way for this child. So take heart in the fact that you're at the right place where nothing is wrong with your child, and it, a month and a half, I know as a parent, it seems like forever. It's a blip once your child gets it.
Absolutely. And it's, the duration of time, a month and a half or 2 months, whatever it is, if you're focusing on something and you're doing it, let's say 4 hours a day, then no, it shouldn't be a month and a half. But if you're just touching on it, like in other words, if you're just trying to guide the child to the bathroom and so on, that's not going to work either. So it's a matter of giving it the right attention.
Yeah.
As we're talking about this, I just had the idea that there's so many really senior specialists here at CARD that it would be kind of cool if we did some sort of, I can't imagine that any behavior would ever stump us. Anything would ever stump us if all of us got together. It would be kind of interesting to set up some system where people could throw their problems at us.
The dream team.
Yeah, just have people throw their problems at us, because I'm pretty sure we'd be able to figure it all out. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's very exciting to me. I know I was so excited when because I used to come to this building as a parent and go to clinics. And then when I came here to work, I always said it was like getting to go underground at Disneyland and see all the different things, the way things work. And on your behalf, I have access to everyone here. So if you write in and have a question, I get to go and say, who's the person to talk about this? And they say, who's really good at working with older kids?
Yes.
Go and talk to Sarah Cho about that. And I get to go and ask her. And I get to learn while I'm finding out for you guys. It really is having access to the dream team, and I think everybody would love that.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, we have to think of a way to do that. Maybe a show.
Yes, a panel.
Yeah.
Now I'm excited. Okay. Somebody else wants to know, how do I make my child sit in a circle time at school?
Oh, that's not too difficult. I mean, you have to identify what's reinforcing or rewarding for your child, obviously. So what I would do is, first of all, I'd make sure that the situation is not unpleasant. So, and then I would do a gradual shaping of the behavior. So I would have my child sit in the circle, and then for maybe, let's assume circle time is 5 minutes. I would probably start with 15 seconds, and then I would reinforce the child, and I would make that gradually 25 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. I would reward that. And so this might take several days, but essentially you're just very, very gradually increasing the schedule and reinforcing good sitting behavior. And at the same time, you want to make sure that what's going on at circle time is interesting enough, and that the child is able to receive intermittent reinforcers. So as you start to approach 1.5 minutes of sitting, I'd throw in a reinforcer at 1 minute, every 1 minute, a slightly milder one. For instance, you could have the child give themselves, or you could have the child sit in the circle and you're standing in the corner of the room and you just draw a smiley face and show it to the child, and every minute you do that, and once they have 5, you let the child get up and go play. So there's a variety of ways to do that, and that would be just one suggestion of how to do it, but a good behaviorist could give you a multitude of different ways that could work.
And I would also say, take heart. My child was one of those kids who, when we first, before we started ABA, there was a little, group that he could go to, and they tried to get him to sit in the circle, and the kids would sing songs and do all the little gestures to the song, and he would act like he was being peeled.
Yeah.
And, and week after week in that group, he would just scream. And they piled on a vest and a blanket and a therapy chair and all this stuff instead of dealing with the issue.
Yeah.
And very quickly, and I began to think...
sound, or what was it?
To this day, I'm sure it was just like 35,000 different things.
Yeah.
And he was with kids who were stimming.
Yeah.
And it was overwhelming to him. The first time we saw him sit in the circle was during spring break, when one of the other kids' older sibling came and sat next to him and was very peaceful and quiet. Yeah. And then he sat there and listened and did things. It gave us hope, but it wasn't until we started getting ABA that very quickly it turned around, and my child was able, I would watch the videos of kids sitting at a table and go, yeah, as if my child's going to do that. But he did. And so take heart, your child will too.
Easy. Yeah, and it's really important what you said, Shannon, because obviously for different children it's going to be different reasons. Most of the time I find for our kids it's either because they're completely bored, they don't know what this is about and why they're supposed to sit there, or there's something going on around them that's disturbing. So whether it's sound, lights, other kids just being too close, something's disturbing. Or like in maybe Jem's case, he was modeling, actually. Who knows? I mean, if all the other kids are running around, then that's what he thinks he has to do too. Yeah. So you have to identify all of that, and that's an easy one. Like I don't know any of our kids that don't actually learn very quickly to sit at circle time. But the point is, the engagement during circle time is important. Yeah. Once they're sitting, are they actually able to understand what's going on around them, pay attention, and so on? And
having realistic expectations too. I think a lot of times what we find is that the expectation is for a 3-year-old to sit in circle time for 20 minutes and have a book read to them, which is, yes, it's on the well, especially, I mean, normally it would be fine because listening to the book might be rewarding for some kids, but not for our kids, because they're not able to pay attention to that. Yeah. And I will tell you that my kid who couldn't sit there, that's one of his strengths now, is that we took him to a lot of theater and things like that, and people always comment on the fact that he'll sit in an assembly and listen. They'll show a movie. He's the kid who can sit there and watch and attend. Right. It's high hilarity at our house now about that. I want to squeeze in one more question, and then we've got to go. But we've had a lot of questions about the extended core curriculum with special ed, and one parent in particular who says, I'm really wanting my child to go to college, but I don't know if he'll be able to do it with this new extended core curriculum, and they want to know your opinion, if you've had any opportunity to look at the special ed core curriculum. I have not yet looked at the core curriculum with special ed. I haven't either, but I have a different perspective on that, in that I'm not sure that schools as it is prepare our kids for college to begin with. I find that with my own children, the school really depends very much on what I'm going to teach my children and not necessarily what they're teaching them. And I also find that it goes beyond going to college varies also. I mean, you could go to a junior college or you could go to a Ivy League. It varies quite a bit. So I've never, I guess, depended too much on what's in the core curriculum to begin with. Yeah. Because I have just had the experience, my oldest is in college now, but I've always had the experience that I've needed to sort of enhance it myself anyway. Absolutely. And I think we all, whether our children are on the spectrum or not, we have a responsibility. The core curriculum is there to make it level and even, that this is what everybody's responsible for. Yes, as the minimum. Right. But we as parents are responsible for ever so much more than that. Right. So thank you for reminding us that. And these days we're so blessed that there's so much online. Yes. If you have a child who's interested in going, some of my kids who are above
above level on various areas, they'll go to the Khan Academy online and they'll start practicing various things that'll help them tremendously. So there's a lot of different ways to do this as well.
I did a blog after I interviewed Temple Grandin. She had made a list of all these online free classes that my son could take that had to do with math and science.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
we wrote it into a blog. And so there's a series on, it's called Talking with Temple. And it might be the fifth one in that lists all the things that Temple said, and they're free. If you do the free, you don't get the college credit for it, but motivate a child and help them in their absolutely. Really remarkable.